Welcome to the Tour Backspin Show. I'm your host, Larry Bosch. We've got a great episode for you about a man who had a huge influence on my golf life, Carl Welty. Carl pioneered the use of video and scientific measurements to teach the golf swing. Our two guests will help us remember Carl and his unique approach to teaching. Our first guest has a very impressive resume, and I witnessed many of his early accomplishments as he grew up across the street from Rainier Golf and Country Club in Seattle, which is now my home club. His early career included winning the Washington State Juniors twice, won the Pacific Coast Amateur at Olympic Club in San Francisco, won the Pacific Northwest Amateur 3 times, and the Pacific Northwest Open. He earned a scholarship to the University of Houston, where he was an All-American, winning 3 collegiate tournaments. He qualified and made the cut in the 1972 Masters and has been ranked in the top 3 instructors in the country for 25 years. And he's the #1 instructor in Florida. He has been named to the Pacific Northwest Golf Association Hall of Fame, the Met PGA Hall of Fame, the South Florida PGA Hall of Fame, and the Miami Sports Hall of Fame, and the Long Island Hall of Fame. We're very honored to welcome Jim McLean to the Tour Backspin Show. Our second guest is the son of Carl Welty, and he is the head pro at Skagit Valley Country Club in Burlington, Washington. He played collegiate golf at Western Washington University, where he was a First-Team Golf Coaches Association of America All-American in 2000, the same year that he tied for 9th at the NCAA Division II National Championship and was a West Region All-Star and District 8 Player of the Year. He competed in the U.S. Amateur in 1999 and the British Amateur in 2001. He is a Northwest native, lucky husband to Camriel, and dad to Jack and Lila. Please welcome Craig Welty and Jim McLean to the Tour Backspin Show. Hi, guys.
Morning, Larry.
Hi, Larry.
Jim, you're on the tee, so you have the honors. So why don't you talk a little bit about how you got introduced to golf and grew up as a junior golfer at Rainier?
Yeah, well, I grew up on the 10th hole, right across from the green. My parents both played golf. I was introduced to the game early. I caddied some at Rainier, but I also played a lot of baseball, and I played basketball hard all through high school. But of course, in the summers, golf was my #1 deal. After I played Little League Baseball, I kind of had to make a decision because I love baseball too. But the overlap here in Seattle was pretty much impossible because I started playing pretty well in junior tournaments at about age 12, at 13, right there. So I'm right at the end of baseball. So anyway, that's how I did it. I had access to the game. I was right there. My dad was a very good player. He was an engineer at Boeing Aircraft. So he loved the game. He played 36 on Saturday and Sunday, a lot of days.
Give us a quick rundown on your amateur career.
Well, I won the Washington State Junior a few times, and I was a medalist in the PNGA Junior, which is, the California and Northern Cal, Oregon, and Washington. I think Craig did the same thing. I had a very good chance to win the Western Junior. My dad put me on an airplane out to Chicago when I was 16. I played in the Western Junior at Purdue University, it was, and I lost in the semifinals, which kind of gave me the feeling that, hey, these are the best juniors in the country. So that gave me a little more confidence. I tried to qualify for the U.S. Junior. The next year I made that to Oklahoma City. I won the Washington State Junior twice. And then I got a 4-year scholarship to the University of Houston. Let me say, I'm just going back here a long time. I also played good at Stanford when I was 17 in the Western Junior. I made it to match play and played a University of Houston player in the second round. He beat me, and he's the one that really talked to Coach Williams at Houston. Coach Williams won 17 NCAA championships, and Houston was the number one school in my era for college golf. So I was off to Houston, and we've had a few Northwest players go to Houston. Owen Fanning, we call him the Big E, who was a good friend of Carl Welty, had gone to Houston before, and I talked to Elwin. So I decided to go to Houston, and I played there.
So during this period, when did you
Is
first get introduced to
okay?
Craig's dad, Carl?
Yeah, well, I won the Northwest Amateur up in Vancouver, BC, British Columbia, and I also won the Northwest Open. And at this time, Carl had gone to Sahalee to open Sahalee for Paul Runyon. So I met Carl in 1969, and he started. He called me when actually he moved to Glen Acres when I really started to know him in 1970, and then he brought his camera out. He did that in 69 and 70, also with a guy named Tag Merritt down at Meridian Valley. They were great friends. So he do these not videos, cameras. It took a while for him to come back, and then I would go over and watch him with him, and he was like super interested. He'd obviously done a lot of work previously. He'd been down at La Jolla. He worked for Paul Runyon at La Jolla with so many great players down there, Gene Littler and Phil Rogers and Billy Casper, and great players, Chuck Courtney. And Runyon was a really respected teacher. And Carl would look at what Runyon was doing on video, or not video, on what do we call it, camera rolls, and see that, hey, some of the things he was teaching, he wasn't really doing. So the Carl loved that. That's where I met Carl. I won a lot of tournaments then at that time. I won the PNGA, the Pacific Northwest Amateur, 3 times. I won the Northwest Open. I remember I went down to Meridian Valley with him after I won the Northwest Open, and he made a tape for me. Well, not video, but a real tape, and he gave that to me. I still have it. I had a good chance to win the U.S. Amateur. I played in a few, qualified for a few U.S. Opens up here, more U.S. Amateurs. I seem to have a streak there in my life where I could really play. I was playing great when I was with Carl and Al Mengert. I had worked with Mengert here, who was a very well-known golf pro at Tacoma Country Club. So between Carl and Al Menger and my dad, I had good instruction and I had confidence. I played good at Houston, pretty good. I was an All-American there. We won the NCAA 2 years when I was there and finished second the other 2 years. My last year as a senior, we were pretty well favored to win, but Texas beat us. And I remember all 5 of us threw our second place trophies in the garbage together. So we were pretty disappointed when we didn't win the NCAA. I kind of wish I had it now, but second wasn't that bad. And that's it, and then I continued to, that's the times I was seeing Carl quite a bit. And then, I went on to play for a few years. I'd see Carl, a professional golf, and then I went to New York. When video came out in the end of 1979, where we could actually buy video, I really started spending more time with Carl. I would go to La Costa. He was down. Then he was running his own golf school at La Costa. I know I'm skipping forward here pretty fast, but he was at La Costa, and I would go out for the Tournament of Champions, stay with him, stayed with. I didn't stay with Carl. We were just there, and we would work a lot of nights till 2 or 3 in the morning. We'd do the videos, then we'd watch them, study them, see what was happening. There is nobody ever in the history of golf that studied golf swings and what was happening in a golf swing like Carl Welty. He was the greatest. I want to get into this a little bit more because that's what we're talking about here. And I want to talk a little bit about Bill Glasson, who was a really big factor in how Carl did research. And Bill Glasson graduated from MIT. His daughter Jane, I still keep in contact with, but he was a genius, really. He worked for Howard Hughes Aircraft. And he knew Howard Hughes well. He was involved in the first NASA space launch, but he loved golf. And later, after he retired and did really well in the stock market, he worked for Golfcraft and built a machine for them that could hit golf balls. Like it was before the Iron Byron. Anyway, he could do anything, and he built a speed machine for Carl in 1966. And then later, he built a machine that could do more, swing path, and how much inside out to outside in, and swing speed, which the first one was swing speed. So Carl was always huge on swing speed. I probably need to stop right now because I could talk for forever about how this progressed. But Craig's here, and maybe we could get Craig in, and
When did you first meet Craig?
I met Craig when he was a baby. He doesn't remember when him and brother Jason. Yeah, they were just little. When I would come up to Skagit, right where you are, and work with Carl when I was, in those years, I would come up to Skagit Valley, and to be a terrible rainy day, and we'd drive up to Skagit and hit balls into the net. And Carl would show me, the greatest players, what they were doing. And that was pretty much the premise of how he taught. We'll get into how he taught. But Jason and Craig were phenomenal. Craig started playing cross-handed when he was, I don't know, Craig, probably 4 or 5 years old.
And no, before that, just diapers. just in diapers. But I find a lot of little kids, really little kids, grab it that way. Two years old and less. But I'm left-handed, so it had something to do with it.
Well, it's so interesting that his father, one of the greatest teachers in the history of golf, continued to allow Craig to play cross-handed. Yeah. He didn't change it, which is really great. And there have been some great cross-handed players through history. Not too many, but some real great players. And Craig ended up, of course, I know you're going to get into this, Larry, but it's a 3-time All-American in college, first-team All-American. Tremendous player. I played with Craig number of times. So there are a lot of ways to be a really good player in this game, and actually cross-handed is one of them.
And Craig, what was your relationship with your dad, and how did you get interested in golf, and also your family legacy here at Skagit? Could you go through that?
Well, going back in time, before I was born, my grandfather, my mother's dad, moved up or bought this golf course with his partners. It was 9 holes. It was a 9-hole private club then. He built the front 9, made it 18, and just made it a bigger, better place, the place it is today. And then shortly after that is when my dad found his way up here, a year after his good friend Tag Merritt was the head pro. Tag was here in 71 for 1 year, and it was kind of a small club in the country. And my dad talked to Tag about coming up, and he said, "Well, there isn't room for both of us." And then at that time, Tag got another pretty good job offer, so he left and recommended my dad come here, and so that's how my dad wound up here at Skagit. And he met my mom here, and then a year later they were married, and a year later my brother was born, and I was born 2 years after that. And so we're talking 72 is when he came. 74 was the year my brother was born, and I was born in 76. And so we grew up, my brother and I, here on the course. We lived on the course, which is suicidal for a golf pro to live on the golf course they work at, right, Jim? But we had the course in our backyard. We would run around. There's a pond. We'd run around the pond and play. There's great videos of us hitting balls, uh, and just we basically had a course to ourselves because the course back then wasn't too busy. I remember my very first birdie was on hole 5, the par 3 right by our house, and it was baseball season, and my dad was watching a baseball game, and so I wasn't really that interested at that young, 4 or 5 years old, and I remember I hit my 5 wood up on the green, and I sunk a long putt, and I just made a beeline, sprinted back home to Dad, and he's sitting in his chair watching the game, and I said, Dad, I made a birdie, and he's watching the game. It must have been a pretty good game. He looked at me and said, "Oh, good," and focused back on the game, and I was like, "Well, that was my first birdie." But he gave my brother and I, the start to our livelihoods with golf. It's a job for me, but it's a lifestyle for my brother now. He plays 200 plus rounds a year and loves the game. And the thing my dad did for us, we didn't know that he was a genius at his craft. But what he did for us was he made it fun. He made it challenging. We always played for something. We played for a pack of cards, piece of gum. He always put something on the line. And it took me years to realize I always wanted a lesson from my dad. I saw him teaching all these other people, these great players. He was giving them lessons. And I said, Dad, I want a lesson. And he'd never give me a lesson. But it took me like into my 20s when I realized he was always giving me a lesson. It wasn't a formal lesson where he sat me down with a piece of paper and asked me my history, but it was a he was constantly giving me a lesson, me and my brother both, challenges, uh, things to just spark our competitive nature and teach us about the game and life all at the same time. He really was a genius at what he did.
He really was. I One thing that we all three have in common is we all grew up on a golf course. We moved out to Meridian Valley. We were the fourth house in there. We were on the 14th hole. I was the run to the litter of the junior crop that we had out there. We had a lot of good juniors. Carl kind of took me under his wing, and I caddied for him. He would take me over to the Lilac City every summer. I've got some great stories about that. He gave me my first beer. um, but I would caddy for him. He would give me the lessons. We would use the camera, the Polaroid that had the eight picture sequence. And then he got his first video disc machine. And then a little while later, he got that first speed machine. And I would come up here to Skagit to work on that speed machine and all of these videos that you see in the background. I would always ask him, or he would always ask me, okay, who do you want to compare your swing to? And I would always pick real tall guys like Tony Lima or Al Geiberger or Tom Weiskopf, and he would go no, and he'd load up Gary Player. And so recently I interviewed Gary Player, and I told him that story, and I told him that I probably have studied his swing more than any other person than himself. And he had very kind words to say about you, Jim, because I guess that he's gone to you. And he said, no one knows more about the golf swing than you do. So that was pretty fun. Carl would also take me on little field trips. And one of my favorite Jim McLean stories is on a field trip that Carl took me to Seattle Golf Club to watch you try to qualify for the 1971 U.S. Amateur. And it was quite an exciting finish to that. And we were on the 18th hole when you finished. And I wonder if you remember that story and if you could tell it.
Yeah, I played Seattle Golf Club yesterday and brought back a lot of memories. That was a big thing in my life. We had one spot for the U.S. Amateur. They always kind of shrifted us here in the Northwest, I thought. We had a lot of good players. But I shot, it was kind of a rainy, cool day, but Seattle's a great golf course. I shot 69 in the morning, and that was no one shot in the 60s. I think the next best score was 71. And then I was playing really good in the afternoon. I was one over for the day. It was par 71. And I came to the 18th hole. I thought I was solid. I thought, that's 141 was probably going to make it. And somebody told me that Steve Cole had shot 72, 68. He was in 140. So I had to birdie 18, which is a par five, but it's a tough par five with the water on the left and up the hill. And I had to hit an iron short of the green, and I pitched it past the hole. So there you were there. It's about 20 or 25 feet past the hole. And I looked up there. I saw Cole up there on the side of the hill, and quite a few other people up there, probably 60 or 70 people. So I had a lot of confidence at that time, and I made it. And then we went into a playoff. We went 3 holes in the playoff, and I beat him on the 3rd hole. That allowed me to go to the U.S. Amateur, where I finished 4th. I had a good chance to win, but I finished 4th, which got me in the Masters. And then I made the cut in the Masters. And that changed. That's a thing people remember. Let's say that. And also, I became very good friends with a lot of the greatest players, young players, which gave me a great opportunity to work with them when I went to work at Westchester. We had the tour event where I was very friendly, let's say, with the guys. So it was very easy for me to video them or talk to them. What were they working on? What were they doing? So that putt on 18 was, Larry, a big putt for me in my life, and that changed things for sure.
Well, let me tell you what I remember after you made that putt. I remember one of the USGA officials coming up to talk to you, and you had a very short conversation. And once that conversation ended, you looked over at Carl and you went like that with your head. And after we've talked about this before, you told they wanted to take you straight to the 10th tee, and you
Right.
said, "No, I have to go relieve myself."
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So we walked up into the locker room, and after you were done with your business, you went over to a vending machine and bought either I can't remember if it was a Mounds or an Almond Joy, but very casually you looked at me and you said, "You want half?" And we sat there and enjoyed a candy bar for a few minutes. And meanwhile, Steve Cole's out there waiting on the tee for the playoff to begin. So you kind of iced him. Join us after this short break, where we will talk with Jim and Craig about the teaching style of Carl Welty. You are invited to explore the evolution of the PGA Tour events in the free Substack newsletter, Tour Backspin. Each Thursday, Tour Backspin will deliver into your email inbox an in-depth, well-researched article that delves into the history of the PGA Tour event being played that same week. Discover how the current PGA Tour evolved from the local Chamber of Commerce promoted events to the mega events of today. Join us as we document the days when the players on the PGA Tour smoked, drank, and generally had more fun. You can find Tour Backspin on Substack at larrybosch.substack.com. That's Larry Bosch, BAUSH.substack.com. Subscribe to get Tour Backspin delivered to your email inbox. Let's get back to our discussion with Jim McLean and Craig Welty.
He had 2 TVs, two VHS tapes. He had the Pro Example and you. And that's how I've taught ever since. Carl taught me how to teach. A big part of that was how to video tape, which he was maniacal about. He yelled at me many, many times, Larry, that this was a garbage piece of tape. There's nothing you can learn from this. He hated pictures, just showing a picture. A lot of pros teach by showing you a picture. He thought that was worthless. You had to be specific. Now, we started off, Craig, you jump in here, but when I really started with Carl, once I got my VHS Sony Betamax to start with from Crazy Eddie's in New York, I went down and got that. Then we had tape, video to share between us to study. Then we went to VHS early, and this was about 1980. And when I came out to see Carl, we started doing for me, this is what it was for me, was the study of players that had won 2 majors and what they had in common. And of course, Carl would study this for hours and hours and hours and days, weeks, months to see if there was anything they all did the same. And, from his work with Bill Glasson, I mentioned earlier, on how to do research, that you had to be diligent, you had to be specific, you had to do things the right way to do effective research. And Bill Glasson was also, I don't want to get into all the things Bill did with golf and with Golfcraft, where Carl also worked. Maybe you can get into that later, but he had put a camera quite a ways far back, like 45 feet back and up, when he was looking at how to study swings. But they decided on 10 yards behind the player, and then straight off a 90-degree angle from the golf ball, from the face-on view, and straight down the target line. And not many teachers still do this. It's baffling to me.
It is.
Couple
There's
major
3 fixed points.
Yeah, 3 fixed points.
Fixed points in the shot.
Yeah, exactly, Craig.
Target, the ball, and the camera.
Yeah, so that became something that you could be specific with. And other teachers teach on the hand, they put the camera low. And Carl told me right away, I asked him about it. There was a well-known teacher doing that. And he said, well, Jim, do you teach on your knees or do you stand up when you teach? That's kind of Carl's answer to when you ask him a question. He would give you an answer that you didn't expect, or that made you look like an idiot, make you look stupid. Or when he came to PGA West later after La Costa at my school, people would ask him a question. He just wouldn't answer because it was such a stupid question.
That's when you know it was a bad question. He didn't get an answer.
Didn't suffer fools lightly.
No, he didn't. He really was.
But he did like the facts. Show me the tape, Jim. Show me the tape.
Yeah, that's what I've learned. That's what I've taught all my teachers. I always love. Well, Carl did love. When I would be later, teaching in New York, I was teaching quite a few tour players at the time, and we would talk about these different ideas, and he said, show me the best players in the world. Are they doing that? So then, he would kind of snap me back into reality, and I would, get back and look and say, not many people are doing that. The best players aren't doing that. And there's still a tremendous amount of that in teaching right now. There's a lot of theory, maybe method, and it's really not true. When you do a study. Later, when I did go to Doral, and I ended up having a lot of teachers work for me, and we had the tour event. Like Carl had the tour event at La Costa, and then we had the tour event at PGA West. It really gave us access to having all of our teachers, and then Carl out, and later Derek Ueda, to videotape all the tour players. So at Doral, we had usually 156 players or 144 players in the tournament. And we taped all of them because I had a lot of teachers working for me. And then we would do the studies, we called them studies. And I'd have them look at specifically one thing. Is the right foot on the ground when they hit the ball? Is the right heel up? And that would be a yes or no. So we try to take the confirmation bias out of it. Which by doing one specific thing, I thought that worked really well. Carl taught me well. I tried to use the Carl Welty method for how I taught golf. And I also, when I taught golf, I always have the person I'm teaching in the lesson. So I didn't do it as much as Carl sometimes did. Can I tell you one quick story?
Absolutely.
Carl? I did a golf school last year up in the Hamptons in New York at a very wealthy club called the Bridge. It's right up there with Shinnecock and National. Some great courses in that area of New York. Anyway, 2 guys I'm working with have beautiful swings. They have great swings, and they're one's a top lawyer and another one is a top business guy. They're members out there. And long story short, I asked eventually at lunch, I asked them, like, where did you learn your swing? And they said, well, we were out in Hawaii together and we had 4 straight days of rain. And it was just nothing, we couldn't play golf. We were total beginners. And we said, well, why don't we just fly to San Diego and take lessons? They flew to San Diego and they took lessons from Carl Welty at La Costa. And I said, well, God, that's so cool. Like, what'd you do? And he said, well, you wouldn't believe this. The first day we went in and we told Carl we were beginners. So he showed us this tape. And I said, was it a Cybervision tape of Al Gabber? He said, yeah, it was. And that's when they put on you, as you guys know, there's dots on the player, and they showed the swing over and over. And Carl had him watch the tape for 4 hours. That was their first lesson. And he would come in occasionally. And I said, come on now, you didn't really do this, did you? Said, no, honest, we didn't know what we were doing. We thought this was how you kind of learn golf. I said, you're kidding me. And then he said, we stayed for 3 days. And Carl basically didn't almost say anything to us. And I said, wow, and you guys were okay with this? And he said, well, yeah, Carl was very convincing. He said, this is how we do it. And he said, a top professional. And they both ended up with these beautiful swings. They don't practice much. They're good players, like 10, 12 handicappers. And they just come out, to play golf for 3 months, occasionally out in the Hamptons. And I was just blown away because they had very little swing thoughts. They hit the ball great, really nice, and they had good looking swings. And that's how they learn. No one's basically, Carl would come in and maybe change the videotape once in a while and just tell them to watch that video. And man, what a great story.
That is so cool.
That's great.
So, Craig, how much of your father do you feel comes out when you give a lesson?
Well, I try as much as I can but really to do exactly what he did, just like that story tells, you have to have a lot of patience. And I'm constantly trying to only give my student one thing to work on at a time. And I'm biting my tongue and biting my tongue. I know there's something else that's really going to help them, but if I tell them that, then there's no way they're going to get the first thing because they're going to forget that. And so, as simple as it looks and as simple as it sounds, the layout of his teaching is effective. It's so effective.
Yeah.
But it's so hard to do as a teacher because you want to teach someone everything. You want to teach them
I would
everything
say
that might help.
it sounds easy, but Carl knew what he was doing, and he put the right things up there. And
he was a master at prioritizing and then picking that priority number one.
He would direct
current members.
Yeah. He would direct the students in the direction he wanted them to go. He'd get them on the path. Yeah. And
one
then
of our current members would come down to PGA West quite a bit. And he'd come back with stories about my dad. And I just loved hearing it from someone else's perspective, from someone that doesn't know my dad, because he was a very unique individual, one of a kind, for sure, a genius mind, and the way he did things was just unique. But he said, yeah, I was thinking about my right elbow coming down, and so I said to your dad, Carl, I feel like my right elbow is coming out a little. What do you think I should do? And he said he sat there and he looked at me for about 30 seconds, didn't say a word. And finally he said, Marty, that's about priority number 23. We're working on priority 1. I'm not even going to give you 2 today. So forget 23. But that would be his style. He had just a great way of simplifying things, making it seem easy for me when he was helping me learn it. And then he'd show you the video example if you're a visual learner to back it up. And it seemed like it just totally made sense.
One more story. Can I tell you one more story?
Yeah, go ahead.
One more. A professional, a club professional, came to see Carl for a lesson, and he was having some trouble, and Carl went out and videotaped him for quite a while. He said about a half an hour they spent out on the range. Carl watched him, and then they came in, and Carl put the videotape in. And the way Carl did it is he would be sitting in front of the TV, and he would put the student behind him because he didn't like the student over on the side. It wasn't a perfect angle to see at that time with the TV, with the roundness on the TV. So he had to be right behind him. So the pro's behind him. He keeps showing the video over and over for like 15 minutes and doesn't say one word. And the pro says, well, Carl, what do you see here? And then Carl played the video again, another 10 minutes maybe, didn't say anything. And he goes, Carl, what do you see? You got to tell me what we're doing here. So Carl gets another tape out and he flips in Johnny Miller. Now he plays Johnny Miller and him together for another 15 minutes. No words I've said so far. And the guy goes, Carl, I don't really understand. What do you see here? And Carl draws a circle around Johnny Miller's left knee. And then he just plays the tape again. And he goes, are you telling me I should be moving my left knee like Johnny Miller? And Carl turns around and says immediately, I don't tell anybody what to do. And so the guy's kind of baffled now. He said, I know who this is. He said, I'm really, this is a setback. So he thanks for him and he said, okay, are you suggesting that I move my left knee more like Johnny Miller? And he turned around and he said, Johnny Miller hits it pretty good. And that was the lesson. And the guy laughed. He said he was pissed. He wasn't happy, that happy about it. But then it really helped him, and it worked. So he said it was a great lesson finally. But he at the time he wasn't too happy about it. But that was kind of a Carl lesson.
Yeah. I know your time is real short. I've only got a couple more questions, but I got to throw in a little story about the last lesson that I took from Carl. And I came down to PGA West, and in fact, that's where when we were doing the pre-lesson interview, you walked in and sat down and told me about how your side of the whole Seattle Golf Club locker room incident went down. So Carl and I go out on the practice tee. He loves the wind because it's coming from the hardest direction to hit off that tee, and tells me to get only bring out a 4-iron. And we take some video. We go back and look at it and compare it. Go back out on the tee, and he's brought in his machine or his gadget setup to get me to come from the inside. And I hit about 5 or 10 more balls, and he goes, I've got a couple errands to run. I'll be back in 20 or 30 minutes. You just keep hitting balls.
Absolutely.
So
That's great. And it probably worked, didn't it?
It did. But I came up here with Craig last year, and out comes the same gadget. So, and that's what I tell all my friends when I put them on video. I go, you're always gonna have the same fault. It follows you throughout your life or throughout your playing career. So you've always got to keep it front of mind. It's always going to be the thing that if you start playing bad or you feel like you're swinging bad, you go back to the same basic fault that you identified with way back when. So how influential was Carl with helping you come up with the concept of the X Factor?
Yeah, Carl's been the mainstay of everything I've done and learning how to do research. I always would talk to Carl. We talked often, had great phone calls. And then I'd go out to see him whenever I could, which was quite often. Carl was super influential. He just showed me how to do research and what was going on. So when we looked early on, what things all tour players were doing, And we ended up with actually quite a few things. A lot of them are very simple, but there's quite a few things that all tour players do. And maybe on some things it's 98%, but a lot of them are quite simple. But with the X Factor, I started monitoring the PGA Tour. We took the top 100 players. I didn't do this all by myself. I did it with Carl and my teachers. But how much ladder? We draw the lines on the legs and look at how much movement away, how much movement forward. What was the head doing in the golf swing? Those were fun things, right with the beginning with Carl of head movement, because we kind of started off with the head not moving idea, the steady head, which I still teach, but the head moves in the golf swing. And we would look to see, Carl showed me how to draw on a TV. This is before computers. So we would draw on the television and we'd draw the person in, and then we would stop it at certain stages and see like where was the body moving. And then he would do this all the time with hundreds of videos that he personally took, or there were a few other people that helped him. Later, Colin Wolchak, I paid Colin to do some videotaping over in Europe when he was there. So we got European tour players. So this is going back a long ways, of course. Now there's more guys obviously here. So we just try to, in the X Factor, I looked at the head movement. So I call it the head turn, how the head turn, the shoulder turn, the hip turn, and then how much the knees hips don't turn, but if you put a line on the knees, you can see how much they rotated on the backswing. So I got all of these ideas, all of them from Carl Welty, on how to do research. And then I just would do stuff, that I would do myself and get my staff to do, and just look at the rotations of the body. So the first X Factor was the Golf Magazine. They said you can't do four things. There's four turns in the golf swing: the knees, the hips, the shoulders, and there's a relationship to all of them. As if now they can't do, that's too complicated. So I finally got them to do two turns: the shoulders and the hips. And I'd spoken to the California section, and there was a pro at I think he was at Bel Air, Mike McTeague, and he had a machine. He called me later, and it was that you put a gyroscope on your shoulders, and it could measure. And in 1992 at Doral, we measured a lot of tour players with the machine, just with the shoulders and the hips, to see how much did the shoulders turn versus the hips. So that was the X Factor, the differential between the shoulders and the hips. There was a relationship that all tour players use. You're not turning your shoulders and hips in tandem. They don't work, together. And then after that, I did Taking the X to Impact. Well, that first article that I finally got done became the all-time #1 best-selling cover piece for Golf Magazine. Then, of course, they wanted to do another one. We did Taking the X to Impact. And then finally, the third cover piece was the four turns in the golf swing, which is the original idea. And Tom Kite was on the cover there. I worked with Tom all of 1992 when he won the U.S. Open. So, and Carl worked a lot with Tom Kite. We both worked a lot with Kite when we were out at the Tournament of Champions, when he was out in California. Tom loved going to see Carl, and so many tour players went down there. When I would come out to La Costa, so many guys would come down to see Carl. I did a tribute to Carl at a PGA Summit, and we talked about Paul Azinger and Freddie Couples, who he traveled with the first year on the tour, helped Freddie tremendously. Curtis Strange and Davis Love, Annika Sorenstam, the giants of the game, John Daly, all came to La Costa, down to a school, and got advice from Carl. And they, I had the letters that they wrote to him. It's really cool. So I learned how to research.
Yeah, Craig just showed a compilation video, and every one of those players you just named are on that compilation video in that studio at La Costa that he had.
Yeah.
So That's pretty cool. And speaking of that, Craig, you're the curator of the famous Carl Welty film collection behind us here. Can you talk about that and the steps that you're taking to preserve this asset to the golf instruction community?
Well, it's been a long process, somewhat stressful. It's I don't know how many videos, haven't counted, but there are there's film, there's mostly VHS, and then most recently there's some digital tapes. Now, I have a friend, his name is Nathan Dills. He's helped me um, get this started and going on going tape by tape and digitizing uh, the videos. So we're making progress on the collection. Um, but so far, I don't have a good way yet of um, viewing and or organizing, reviewing the video. But that's coming in the next little while. I just can't. I don't have any time in the summertime to work on that, so it's got to be a winter project for me. Um, but I don't know the right thing to do with all this video, but it can't go away. So I'm trying to preserve it and make sure it gets digitized and people can view it. Um, yeah, I don't know the best way to do it, but I'm working on that. There's just too much good stuff in here to not have out for people to see.
Totally agree. Jim, this is my last question. When you were working at Westchester Country Club, was Fred Corcoran still a member there?
No, he wasn't. Fred wasn't there, but his house. I know where his house is. It's right, very close to Wingfoot, and right close to Quaker Ridge, where I went. I was the head pro at Quaker Ridge, but yeah, he was a big guy in golf, of course. With starting the PGA Tour. Did you know him?
No, he was very influential as Tony Lima's business manager, though.
Yeah.
So, doing my research, I learned a lot about Fred Corcoran and have been in touch with his kids and grandkids. So, he was quite the character.
Yes.
So, why don't you tell our listeners and viewers how they can contact you if they'd like to come attend the Jim McLean Golf School?
Well, it's just jimmclean.com. Pretty easy. I've got a Instagram account and YouTube account is McLean Golf. My son John works with me now. John lived with Carl. My other son lived with Carl too. Matt, they are both teachers, and Matt's teaching at Fisher's Island in New York, which is a top 10 course in the United States. John's teaching in the summer in Jackson Hole, and then he comes back and he pretty much runs the business. But John he'll go out and play, and he played for 8 years of professional golf, so he played all over the world. Um, but he's got such a simple swing. Every time he goes out to play, he shoots 65 or 62 or something. But Carl had a big influence on both of my boys, huge influence, and they've both done well in the business.
Yeah.
Craig, how do people contact you if they'd like to come up here in nice, quiet Burlington and Skagit Country Club and get a lesson from you?
I try to keep them away because I'm busier than I want to be. Uh, um, no, we're a small private club, so people can call. I am allowed to teach non-members. I I have done a little traveling in the past to teach, but I'm not with my kids' ages now. I'm not really doing that much anymore, which is great. It's fine. Uh, Teaching is fun, and for me, it does come somewhat naturally because of everything I learned from my dad and and others like Jim. I spent a couple of some great years of my life at Jim's house when his boys were in high school. I had finished college and I got to be basically their nanny. and they would go to school, and then they'd come home from school, and we go straight to the course. And Jim would set us up with everything we needed. We had a couple different courses we could play. We beautiful home with a yard, swimming pool. I don't think we ever went swimming though. There's a par three over on the side. We spent more time over there or in the indoor hitting area.
Yeah.
But after college, not really knowing what I wanted to do, looking back at that time, that was magical. I got to either go with Jim to work or work on a project at the house. He had a real hole inside of the yard. I just, yeah, look back so fondly at those times, and yeah, both of your boys just are special to me, and now they're adults starting families and just doing great things in golf. So it's so fun and rewarding to look back at that and get to spend those years with them. And then I got to caddy for John a few times and watch him play some amazing golf. Yeah, those are just some fond memories. But
Craig,
as far as getting
I,
a lesson, just they can
oh, yeah.
call Skagit for close.
God, those are special times, Craig. I want to thank you for all the influence you've had on my boys too, and I sure hope I can sneak up there and see you. I know you're super busy, but Larry, thanks for having me on. It was really
Thank you.
great. We could talk for days about Carl. Really,
We
there's
could.
all kinds of stories, and
Yeah.
I missed him a lot. I
Yeah.
always had my phone calls with him, and they were great. He was really something special. Thanks again for having me on.
I really appreciate the time that you've sliced out of your vacation for us. And yeah, it was just wonderful talking about somebody that was so influential in my life as well. Thank you.
You all. Bye.
Thank you, Craig.
Jim, thank you. Talk to you soon.
Safe travels,
Thank you.
Jim. Thanks again.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us for the Tour Backspin Show, and I hope you enjoyed the discussion with Jim McLean and Craig Welty about Carl Welty. If you did, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Threads, and Notes on Substack. Don't miss a thing we do here by subscribing to the Tour Backspin newsletter on Substack at larrybosch.substack.com. Thanks for watching, and keep on trucking. The Tour Backspin Show adheres to the sustainable practices of all golf courses by minimizing water usage and preserving natural habitats. The podcast is 100% pesticide-free and is handcrafted and produced, written, and directed by Larry Bosch.